Hey, hello. If you're here, you know what time it is. It is time to talk February anticipated releases, and as usual, we have a lot to talk about. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get the ball fully rolling. I am going to be mentioning HarperCollins titles today. HarperCollins has agreed to meet with its union via an independent mediator. There has not been a resolution to the strike yet. However, I am hopeful that we are on the right track, and while I will continue to hold my reviews as the union has asked for, I am kind of trying to straddle this line of supporting the union and still supporting authors, because at this point, I don't trust HarperCollins at all, and once this is resolved, hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, I don't trust that they're not going to look at the sales numbers for December and January that have unequivocally, I think, been impacted by the strike, whether it's from the publicity being different because the workers were on strike and or the reviews being held, and also a lot of creators like myself really have been holding all mentions of HarperCollins in an abundance of caution for the union. Again, a buying ban has never been an ask. However, I don't trust HarperCollins to look at those sales numbers from December and January and to take into account extenuating circumstances. I think that they are going to look at the raw numbers, and we know that for authors without a large following already, this could be incredibly detrimental to their careers. And this will, as usual, largely impact marginalized authors, debut authors, people without that already built-in audience, which, you know, is one of the reasons people would choose to publish traditionally and go to a large publishing house that they would think would have that publicity angle to help them, but that's neither here nor there. So for today, we are going to mention these titles, and as usual, we are going to frame this within the context of the strike and the fair pay and diversity initiatives that are at the core of what the union members are asking for from HarperCollins. Also, usual caveat that these are the books that are on my radar, but there are so many books coming out this month, so feel free to leave the books you're excited about below, whether they are books I talk about or not, and if you find any of this helpful or engaging in any way, feel free to like and subscribe. But for now, let's start out with one of my most anticipated books, maybe of the year, which sounds pretty hyperbolic in February, but if you've been with me for a second, you know that I love Mariana Enriquez's short stories, Things We Lost in the Fire and The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. And when The Dangers of Smoking in Bed came out, I was worried that I had set my expectations for that collection so high or too high based on my love of Things We Lost in the Fire. That was incorrect, thank goodness. However, we are now getting her first English translated novel, Our Share of Night, by Mariana Enriquez, and translated again by Megan McDowell. This partnership has really worked for me as a reader. Megan McDowell also translates Samantha Schweblin, who are two of my favorite translated authors. So I will be very interested to see how this partnership continues to develop in a novel format. However, I am much more interested to know how Enriquez is going to write in a novel format. Now, this book has, I believe, been out in the UK since last year, so the English translation is already out and about in the world. I just didn't realize the UK version was coming out first. Otherwise, I may have been tempted to buy it. I might have had both editions. And of course, this has been out in Argentina, and I would presume other Spanish-speaking countries for a while. However, I am very, very excited about this. I mentioned my expectations of The Dangers of Smoking in Bed only because there's a small part of me that's like, are you doing it again? But I don't think I am, because I have seen a couple influencers that I trust already talking about this title, very excited. And I am very excited. This follows a father and son who have recently lost their mother and wife as they go on this road trip. And this road trip that they are taking is to her family home. But this woman that they are grieving was part of a secret society that commits unspeakable acts in the search for eternal life, according to the blurb. I did not originate that verbiage. And this puts this father and son on the run because this order is trying to possess the son, Gaspar. So this is going to, my reading, have a lot of adventure, these horror elements, and I think that this format is really going to be a great transition from the short stories that are so beloved to a more novel format. So I think it's going to be a great bridge for people who are already in love with Enriquez's work and also open up a wide new audience universe. And I say this because this idea of this road trip and what they're going to encounter along the way lends itself to being more episodic, which is kind of the nature of the short stories, right? So we're going to be, I presume, running into a lot of independent horrors that are tied together with this through line. And as usual, I'm sure this is going to be exploring the kind of base, darker side of human nature in a really compelling way, while also exploring ideas of legacy as well as corruption. So I think that this is going to be an incredibly exciting novel. I think it's going to introduce even more readers to Mariana Enriquez's work, because as beloved as her short stories are, I believe, within my own bubble too of loving them, short stories aren't the broadest appealing form, admittedly. So I think that this is going to appeal to a wider audience, especially of horror fans. And I am just incredibly excited. I have this pre-ordered. I anticipate talking about this in an upcoming Feature Friday, so stay tuned, we'll see, but I am incredibly excited. And this is all February 7th since I jumped right in. But to continue with that jumping right in, we next have Radiant Sin by Katie Robert. This is the next in her Dark Olympus series, and this is Apollo and Cassandra, which, having even a little bit of knowledge of mythology, I'm like, because this is a romance, it's going to have a happily ever after, and it's Apollo and Cassandra. So I am anticipating some pretty large deviations from the original, but I also anticipate then that this is going to be a little darker within the concept of this already being Dark Olympus, of course. But this follows Apollo as the kind of spy master of this world that has been set up, what Olympus looks like within this universe, and him and Cassandra are going undercover at this house party. I am a sucker for a good house party, admittedly, though I've really only ever read them in historical romances. So I'm interested to see how that's going to translate, and I am of course interested to see what Cassandra and her prophecies are going to look like in this universe. I think that is what I'm most intrigued for in this version. So I've really been enjoying this series. I admittedly love books that have these kind of intertextual conversations within their own genre conventions. So I'm excited to see how this series continues and what kind of inventiveness Robert uses in her version of events. So excited for this one for sure, and a great February release. And then we have Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, which already has over 100,000 ratings on Goodreads. And so you're probably like, huh? Or maybe not, because this is the traditionally published release of an incredibly popular self-published title. We are seeing a lot of these self-published books, especially that go big on TikTok, getting picked up by traditional publishers. I admittedly have not read this yet. This is a romance between a figure skater and a hockey player. The hockey player has to become her partners in pairs, I believe. And this has, as expected, gotten a lot of buzz, especially on TikTok. If you've read this, let me know. I think I've heard good things about this from my own circle, but I admittedly am really, really behind on those kind of self-published books that take off on TikTok because my TBR is already overflowing and I don't have Kindle Unlimited because I'm really trying to hold out on that piece of the Amazon puzzle. So I haven't read this yet, but I am excited to read it. I admittedly haven't really been on the hockey romance side of things, but I know within that world this is very popular, so I might consult my sources yet on this one, but I am intrigued and do anticipate picking this up at some point in the future. Again, no promises. There's a long list this month. And then we're getting Stone Blind by Natalie Hayes, which is another Greek mythology retelling, and this is looking at Medusa's story. Now, admittedly, the Greek retelling market has begun to get a little more saturated, outside of like Katie Robert, who is doing a romance spin on things, but we have definitely seen an influx in these titles after the incredible success of Madeline Miller. I am, like a lot of people, drawn to mythology retellings. I love them. However, I have noticed a kind of mileage may vary with some of these releases that have been coming out. There are a couple authors that I just haven't gelled with very well. However, Natalie Hayes is not one of them. She wrote 1,000 Ships, and she also wrote Pandora's Box, which is a nonfiction look at kind of our relation to these myths and the women in these Greek myths and how they've been treated both at the time and since within these larger narratives. I really enjoyed both books, and especially after reading Pandora's Jar last year, I did that on audio, if that makes a difference to you, I am very intrigued to see Medusa's story, because I think even I frequently forget that Medusa's story is started by a assault. She is often framed as a villain, especially because we are often seeing her in relation to Perseus, but I think that this is going to be an incredibly humanizing take, and I think it is not going to necessarily be something that ends happily, obviously, but I'm very, very interested to see how the narrative is kind of reclaimed in this, and I personally trust Haynes to reclaim that narrative in a way that I respond well to, so we'll see if that happens. And then we have Wild Blood by Lauren Blackwood. She has also written Within These Wicked Walls, which is a Jane Eyre retelling that I admittedly haven't read yet, but heard really compelling things about. And this looks at a young woman who was kidnapped as a child and works for this exotic touring company. So it's this kind of heightened dystopian universe, it seems, and she has been passed over for a promotion she was anticipating, and it goes instead to her rival and ex-boyfriend. And she ends up connecting with this gold miner who is a new client of this company that her boss doesn't trust her to portray the correct image of the company for, but they end up hitting it off, and they end up going on this adventure through the jungle. And even though they connect, the jungle seems like it's going to be a kind of liminal space within this world, and I assume that this is going to have a lot of commentary within the world creation as well. So I'm very intrigued by this. I usually don't gravitate to stories that feel like they're going to lean a little bit more into the man versus nature, which I know sounds odd since I gravitate toward things that take place in forests. And I think that that's the kicker here, is that this jungle feels like it is going to be a forest. I'm attracted to the liminal spaces and the transformative spaces, and I think that that's what we're going to have here, especially in relation to the world that it seems like it's establishing even within the blurb. And I think that that is only going to be bolstered by social critique, so I am intrigued by this one for sure. And then we have Not Your Exes, Hexes by April Asher, and this is second in the Supernatural Singles series, try saying that 3 times fast, that started with Not the Witch You Wed. This follows Rose, our sister from the first book, who was training to be the prima her whole life, and that expectation has been somewhat upset. And now she's kind of focusing on herself when her whole life she has been focused on this council. And so she ends up having this one-night stand with a half-demon, but neither of them are looking for a relationship, so they go their separate ways, even though Rose can't stop thinking about him. And then she ends up being assigned community service at the animal sanctuary he runs, and they end up in this kind of friends with benefits, no strings attached scenario. And as romance readers, I think we can anticipate how that is going to end. So I'm excited for this one. I think that the world that the first book set up is a lot of fun. It reminds me, like I've said before, of a lot of the supernatural rom-coms of the 2000s, with a more modern twist, obviously, but I'm excited to see how that continues, so we'll definitely be eager to check this one out. And then we have Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. I admittedly don't have a lot to say about this one because this is a sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I haven't read because that is more of a slasher kind of bend of horror, and that's not really what I gravitate toward. I don't gravitate, or at least I don't consider myself someone that gravitates to horror anyway, but I think that that's also something I'm really starting to have to reevaluate. Either way, I haven't read My Heart is a Chainsaw, and I don't know if I'm going to end up picking it up, but I really liked Stephen Graham Jones's Mongrels, and I think he is really making a name for himself within the horror genre, and so I definitely think that this is something to keep your eye on if you're interested in that. And then we have Essex Dogs by Dan Jones. This is the first fiction release from a pretty notable or popular historian. I have read at least one of his nonfiction books. I read The Plantagenets on audio. I have at least one more on audio that I haven't started yet. I believe he also has a couple of popular television programs. I feel like I've seen him as a host on at least one Netflix series where I was like, wait, I know that name. But this is his first historical fiction. And this is a historical fiction that takes place in 1347, and it's really focused on this platoon that calls themselves the Essex Dogs that lands in Normandy. So it's really going to be a look at medieval warfare, I believe. I'm intrigued from the medieval angle. I'm intrigued from the angle of this being written by a historian that I previously enjoyed in nonfiction. The war angle, admittedly, isn't so much what's drawing me in here, but I think that that is going to be a big draw for a lot of readers, and I definitely think you're going to see this on a lot of tables come Father's Day. The blurb also does have at least one reference to Band of Brothers, and they are landing in Normandy, so we'll see if we get any Henry V quotes within this book as like chapter openers or the start to the book. I don't know, I haven't read it, but it's something I've got my eye on. And then we have A Spell of Good Things by Ayobami Adebayo. This is the author of Stay With Me, which came out many years ago now, but I remember really enjoying. I think I listened to that on audio as well. And this seems to be an exploration of class and power in Nigeria through the lens of two protagonists from vastly different circumstances and how their lives kind of come together through circumstance and power. And so the blurb bills this as an exploration of wealth, power, romantic obsession, and political corruption. So I think that this is going to be sweeping. It's going to be emotionally impactful and very compelling. And while I anticipate this being a more straightforward narrative structure, though I could be wrong, I think that if you also enjoyed Vagabonds last year, this may be up your alley as well. And then Venko by Sherry Demeline, author of Empire of Wild, and the probably more popular, but I admittedly haven't read yet, The Marrow Thieves. So I know that she does supernatural really well, and this is also supernatural. It follows a woman who comes across this spoon that connects her to a coven of witches all across North America, and this also puts her in the path of a witch hunter as she heads to New Orleans for this kind of final magical showdown. I'm very intrigued because it involves a front company fueled by dark money, and our protagonist is exploring all of this through the framing of the magic of her indigenous ancestry. So I think that this is going to be full of adventure and magic and commentary, and I also think that because I am so excited to pick this one up, it's perfect that I also started listening to the nonfiction title White Magic as of last night. So very excited for this one and its take on magic and witchcraft, especially within the modern moment. And then we are moving on to the 14th for our Valentine's Day releases, of which we are starting with Goddess by Deborah Hemming. This follows a protagonist who gets caught up with a famous actress turned wellness guru, Gaia, and gets invited to this wellness retreat where things kind of spiral. So I am anticipating a kind of supernatural element based on the title and the fact that our influencer is named Gaia. I've read a couple of reviews, admittedly, that lead me to believe this may not be the kind of searing, dark comedy takedown of goop that I, in my heart, want this to be, but I'm still intrigued enough to see what this is going to be because I'm really interested in this kind of commentary around wellness culture, and especially kind of influencer, Instagram-y kind of wellness culture and the front of it all. So we'll see what this ends up being, but I'm intrigued enough to find out. And then we have one of the other titles I'm most excited for this month, The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chakshi. This is her adult debut, I believe, or at least that's how it is being billed. Her young adults are magical and lyrical, and I'm so excited to see how that is going to translate to this adult story, especially as it is also being sold as this kind of romantic dark gothic where this heiress marries this scholar and they have this kind of whirlwind romance, and their happily ever after is kind of predicated on this agreement that the bridegroom won't ask about her past. So when the bride's aunt is dying, they have to go back to the bride's childhood home where her best friend or close friend in childhood also disappeared, and the bridegroom starts becoming invested in the secrets of this crumbling house and is lured into this past. And these secrets blur the lines of fantasy and reality and could potentially threaten their marriage. So this looks like it's going to be the really lyrical and kind of darker fairy tale-esque storytelling that I personally really associate with Chakshi, outside of maybe like her Gilded Wolves trilogy, which I admittedly still haven't finished, but did really enjoy the first one of. But this is being billed as kind of a Mexican Gothic meets Addie LaRue. Of course, take all of your comp titles with some grains of salt because they're going to comp to the kind of biggest common denominator books, but I think that that is a really intriguing blend, and I love the author. So I'm very excited to see what this ends up being. And of course, we have that promise of this kind of gothic setting, which is always great. And then with Stone Cold Fox by Rachel Kohler-Croft, we are following a woman who, with her mother, was kind of a con woman for a long time, but she is looking to go straight. But what this means for her is marrying into a very wealthy family, and she is on the precipice of success there. But one of the friends of her soon-to-be groom is kind of onto her, which leads to this kind of cat and mouse thing going on between the two of them. them. So this is a thriller with those secrets and that past and this kind of race to the altar in some ways. So this is kind of a bleed over of that trend we were seeing with January releases, of these kind of looks into elite spaces, or people kind of breaking into these elite spaces through some kind of fraud or con, and different degrees of con, admittedly. But I think this is the title that we are going to see the most kind of marketing dollars behind. I foresee this getting a pretty big push when it comes out, just from what I've seen already, but I could be completely off the mark there too. So we will see. And then we have Take the Lead by Alexis Daria. This is a re-release of her first novel, which I believe was self-published, but don't quote me on that. I believe this book also won some Ritas the year it came out, but this is a kind of Dancing with the Stars-esque romance that involves a showmance, fake romance angle that we will presumably see become real. But Alexis Daria has been a really exciting voice within the last couple of years, and we've seen her do celebrity romance really well, so I'm excited to see what this is gonna look like. All right, and then let's move on to February 21st, starting out with one of the bigger releases, probably of the month, if not the first half of the year. We have I Have Some Questions by Rebecca Makkai, the follow-up to the incredibly successful The Great Believers. This follows a woman with some tragedy in her past, including the murder of her former roommate. And when later in life she accepts a role at the institution at which this occurred, she starts encountering things that make her question things about that event and the resolution of that case in a way that she had been kind of running from those questions and looking to forget that and move past that event. And so being back in this environment unearths a lot of this and makes her question the verdict and the guilt of the man put away for this crime. So I'm very intrigued, both from a kind of analysis of the kind of true crime moment we are in. I anticipate a little bit of commentary on that, but I guess we'll see. I'm also very interested because Rebecca Makkai is a Chicagoland author, and I would think arguably one of the best moderators for author discussions in the city that I've seen. And I've seen her on a couple of panels talking about how she's not really interested in straightforward linear storytelling at this time. And I don't think we necessarily saw that in The Great Believers, obviously, as we had these kind of two storylines going on at the same time and looking into the past. But I'm really interested to see how that's going to translate into this book, and if we're going to see some experimentation of form as well. Either way, I think that it is going to be a really insightful and compelling look at this story, because I think her last book was so compelling. And I really liked her first book that I read as well, The Borrowers, although that is a little bit odder in a different way. But I also think that that fits within the current moment too. So I guess I'm just really intrigued to see what angle she comes at her storytelling for this book. And I'm really hopeful I'll get to see her in conversation about this at some point. I didn't see her talk about The Great Believers in a kind of independent event, but I did hear her in conversation with R.O. Kwan in her event for The Incendiaries, and those novels had a lot of overlap in terms of exploration in relation to kind of like cult thinking, and that was a great discussion. So I would be very intrigued to see her talk about her work going forward, and I anticipate that that is something that I should have access to. So I just need to keep my eyes open, but I think we all need to keep our eyes open for this book. I'm anticipating it being very big. And then we have Conspirator by Veronica Roth. This is a novella. It is a sci-fi Antigone retelling. That's really all I've got. And then we have Wolfish, Wolf, Self, and the Stories We Tell About Fear by Erica Berry. This is a nonfiction kind of blending of psychology, folklore, kind of look at wolves, I believe. So I'm very intrigued by this, particularly for the stories we tell ourselves about fear angle. I do believe it's going to be following a specific wolf on a journey of some sort as well. I'm not usually as compelled by like nature writing or wildlife writing, so we'll see how that blends together, but I am anticipating picking this one up on audio, so no surprise there, I don't think. And then also in the nonfiction realm, but I'm definitely gonna have to read this off of my computer due to a very lengthy subtitle, The Curse of the Marquis de Saad, A Notorious Scoundrel, A Mythical Manuscript, and the Biggest Scandal in Literary History by Joel Warner, and apologies for any mispronunciation there. This is looking at the kind of mythos that developed around 100 Days of Sodom and following its kind of literary trek and the history of all of that. So I'm intrigued by this as a literary thriller in kind of the most literal terms kind of sense, and just based on what sense I'm getting from the blurb, I anticipate that if you liked something something like The Feather Thief, this may be up your alley as well. For something that's kind of like a thriller, true crime narrative, or has a true crime bend, but isn't like too dark. It's something that's like a book or an artifact. But I think exploring kind of the cultural ideas that have developed around this work too are going to be very interesting. So it's something I don't really know a whole lot about. I kind of just know what exists in the zeitgeist. So I'll be interested to learn more, and I do, as I've said before, kind of like that zoomed in kind of odd history, and I think that that's going to fit the bill here. I don't know if that made sense, but we're going to go with it and move on to February 28th. So the first book for the 28th is She is a Haunting by Trang Van Tran. This has been getting a lot of buzz. This is a YA queer horror novel, and it follows a young woman who is going back to Vietnam where her father is restoring a house. But there is something wrong with this house. There is a thrumming from the walls. There are pieces of bugs being left. She's seeing ghosts of her ancestors in the garden, but she's the only one that is experiencing all of this. So she, along with another girl, are on a quest to prove that this house is destroying them. So I think that this is going to be a really interesting look at expectations and legacy and the ways that they can trap and haunt us. And like I said, I have been seeing this getting incredible reception, so I am very intrigued, even if I think that pieces of it are going to be pushing it even for me, especially the bug angle that is hinted at the blurb. We'll see. I anticipate this might be actually scary instead of kind of like scary adjacent, which is what a lot of the gothics I end up reading are. So we'll see how well I do with this, but I'm definitely going to give it a try. And then we have Immortality, a love story by Dana Schwartz, the follow-up to last year's Anatomy, a love story, which picks back up with Hazel, and she ends up getting pulled in to kind of intrigue at court. She still doesn't know if Jack is alive or dead, so I'm very interested to see what turn this is going to take, especially because I did not anticipate the kind of court angle of things, but I am admittedly kind of a sucker for novels that take place within the kind of political intrigue of court, because you've got the political maneuverings that are often informed by personal maneuverings as well. So I don't know. We'll see what this ends up being. I enjoyed the first one enough, even if I didn't find the romantic subplot of it as grounded as I wanted it to be, and some of the comments and interviews after the book came out made me scratch my head a little bit because it seemed to think that it was a little bit more groundbreaking and new, and I felt like it was part of a larger conversation with young adult that came out in the mid-2000s, that it was exploring similar things and especially kind of pulling from a lot of that original Gothic fiction for inspiration, which isn't a bad thing. I think that kind of intertextuality is great, and it's a kind of story type that readers are really intrigued by. And so the kind of positioning of it made me kind of side-eye a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, but I am intrigued enough to see where this story is going. And then in novella retellings, we have The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill, which is a novella retelling of The Crane Wife. I am not as familiar with the source material here, so if I were to read this one, I would need to go back and read The Crane Wife first, but I really enjoy Kelly Barnhill. I still need to read her adult release from last year, but I think that her work is lyrical and magical, and her language is incredibly specific and insightful, and I'm always interested in the ways that she approaches stories because she always comes at them from a really interesting angle. So I would be intrigued to see how she handles a retelling of this nature, but again, I just need to familiarize myself a little bit more with the source material so I can fully appreciate it. And then to continue on after a brief hiatus called My Camera Died, so apologies for any difference in lighting or potential sound interference here because it is later in the day. But next we have Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sambury. I am very excited for this one, and not just because of the gorgeous cover, but this is a kind of dual timeline narrative, according to the blurb, that is being comped as The Haunting at Hill House meets Sadie, and it follows Daisy, a young woman in Toronto who can see the dead, and this is becoming a little overwhelming for her, especially amidst a recent breakup, so she is very excited by the chance to get away after her mother inherits this house that her mother spent her childhood at, but the house has secrets. And 10 years later, Brittany is dealing with the legacy of this house in relation to her mother, who is a famous author, but is also abusive, and she has decided to devote a season of her popular web series Haunted to the mansion and to kind of dismantle some of what she believes are her mother's lies. So just based on the blurb, this has so many things that I am intrigued by. Haunted houses, dual timelines, the ability to see ghosts, and I'm also super intrigued by the web series angle. I'm always interested in ways, especially in young adult literature, that the narrative can meet readers where they're at now. So I think that this is going to be incredibly compelling, and I'm very excited for it. Though I don't know what it means for us that we're getting so many compelling haunted house type stories in February. It may be that we're just working through some stuff, which makes sense, but I'm admittedly excited for it. So this is definitely toward the top of my list for the month, and I definitely still need to get to Blood Like Magic as well. And then we have Enchantment Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age by Catherine May. This is a follow-up to Wintering, which I admittedly haven't read yet, though it was getting a lot of great reception when it came out. Probably unsurprisingly, if you watched my video on self-help last week, I wasn't sure where Wintering was going to fall in kind of the spectrum of self-help and whether it would be something that I would click with or not. And these books really do look like they could go either way for me. But this one in particular, I really do want to give a shot, and I want to see how it kind of conceptualizes and frames anxiety, especially within kind of the modern landscape and the current moment. I admittedly do have anxiety, and I have been working to get that under control in various ways over the last year especially, or kind of like reprioritizing getting that under control. And I'm very interested in kind of the external factors of the current moment and the ways that that is kind of exacerbating everything. So I'm hopeful that this will offer some tools or perspectives and even just kind of casual reminders that the age and the moment we're living in is kind of feeding into everything. And I'm not saying that the ages in the past haven't, because every moment has its own anxieties, for sure, but kind of looking at it through the lens of the current moment, because that's the moment I'm in, I think will be really helpful. So we'll see what we get there. And I think some of my friends have read Wintering. I think it's Wintering. Anyway, if you've read that one, please leave your thoughts below, because I'm very interested to kind of see if I'm gonna click with this style for sure. And then we have The Neighbor Favor by Christina Forrest, which looks like it's going to be perfect for those who love kind of bookish romances. And it follows Lily, who dreams of being a children's book editor, even though she's kind of been stuck in the nonfiction division for a long time. And she's had this correspondence with a popular fantasy author, kind of anonymously, that gets really deep really quick, and then it just stops. But in the current moment, she needs to find a date to her sister's wedding. She somehow reaches out or bumps into her neighbor Nick, who somehow gets involved in this plot to find her a date for this wedding. What she doesn't know is that Nick is this author that she had been corresponding with. So we got that kind of anonymous, you've got mail-y type. Well, it's not enemies to lovers, but it's also not like Cyrano. So I don't know. I'll be interested to see what we get here, but it looks charming. And I think a lot of us are suckers to varying degrees for romances about bookish people. So definitely want to give this one a go. And then finally, we have Black Candle Women by Diane Marie Brown. This is an intergenerational tale following the Montrose women who live in a two-story bungalow in California and live a pretty isolated existence. But when the youngest Nikki brings home a boy for the first time, they have to disclose this family secret that they have been cursed, that those they love will die. And so this forces them to reckon with their own choices and pasts while looking to the future and kind of reckoning with this curse. So while I admittedly am not usually as drawn to intergenerational as the main selling point, as I know a lot of other people are, this also has that kind of magic bend. And so I'm very interested in how the existence of magic will make some of these unspoken intergenerational things more tangible and something that you have to confront a little more physically. So very excited for this one as well, as I am excited for all of these to varying degrees. So with that, we have gotten through all of them. Were there times I second-guessed my lack of editing down this list? Yes, but hopefully that lack of editing paid off for you in some way in the end as well, because I wanted to be able to offer you the widest swath of books that I was personally interested in. So with that, as usual, let me know what you're interested in, whether it was talked about already or not. Read something good, like and subscribe again just if you feel like it, and yeah, bye.